It's a fault that I have, I admit it. Anyway, David says in Psalm 36, transgression speaks to the wicked deep in his heart. There's no fear of God before his eyes. Now that's also quoted by Paul in Romans chapter 3. There's no fear of God before his eyes. And this is the problem that is being confronted in our passage today. No fear of God. And Proverbs says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Well, how does that work? Well, when you have a fear of the Lord, that means that you can see things from God's perspective, or at least you can understand that he is the creator of all things. And so as you begin to gain God's perspective, that's wisdom. That's what it is. Wisdom isn't something of a human experience. It's an understanding of a recognition of the truth behind all of our experiences. And what is that that's behind all of our experiences? But God, the creator. But what if there is no fear of God? Well, then foolishness reigns. Morality, ethics, justice, all of those things really have no foundation if there is no God. Oh, the sociologists will tell you those are all social constructs. No, they aren't. They are foundationally based on the idea that there is something beyond ourselves that we are obligated to. If there is no fear of God, then all of those things eventually disappear. They erode away. And so that's why the martyrs in Revelation chapter 6, they ask God, how long before you do something about all of this, God? Because we are not seeing justice. We definitely did not experience justice. And if there's no fear of God, then there is no justice really being practiced. And so we only find it in you, God, and that's why we're coming to you now. How long will you delay? And so we get to chapter 14, and then we start to see his justice enforced. Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud, one like a son of man, with a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Now, as we said last week, whenever you see John say, behold, that means we've got a scene skip. Somebody's got the fast forward button, and they keep hitting it, and they keep moving through the scenes. And so these are not in the timeline that we would become accustomed to as we went through the 7 seals and then the 7 trumpets. This little vignette here at the end of chapter 14 is like the other vignettes that are in chapter 14. It's a skip. It's out of the sequence of the timeline. John has fast forwarded, and we're seeing a little bit of something here that ultimately is going to give us a preview of the coming attractions that we're going to see in chapter 16. Verse 14 says, behold, one like the Son of Man, which is, of course, Jesus' favorite title for himself. It's used 81 times in the Gospels. And mostly it fits the format of what we see in John chapter 5, verse 27. And he, that is God, has given him authority to execute judgment because he is the Son of Man. Which, of course, is then pulling language forward from the Old Testament, Daniel chapter 7, verse 13. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him, and to him was given dominion. So here is one like a son of man. And our passage says that he has a sharp sickle. Now, maybe you've grown up in suburbia your whole life and have never experienced farm life, but a sharp sickle, well, a sickle is a long curved blade used for harvest. Sometimes it's used for cutting out weeds and things like that. I've got one at home. But the idea is that it is now time to harvest, and he's got his tools ready and prepared for this harvest. But it also then brings to mind for me Matthew chapter 13, and you maybe remember this parable where Jesus talks about a sower, a man who owned a field, and he goes out and he sows wheat in his field. But then in the middle of the night, some enemies come along and they sow weeds in among the wheat. And as the wheat grows up, so does the weeds. And the servants come to the master and they say, hey, look, somebody put weeds into your field. Do you want us to go and cut them out? And the master says, no. In the process of you trying to get all the weeds out, you may pull up some of the wheat as well. Let's let it all get ripe, and then we'll deal with it at the harvest. We'll harvest it in together, and then we'll separate weeds from wheat. And in fact, I think that's what we have going on here. It all waits. Weeds or wheat, it all waits until the harvest. God decrees then and enacts a harvest of judgment. Verse 15, and another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe. Now pay attention to that word fully. In the Greek, it's just one word, zeranos. And it means that it's overripe. You might recognize that a culture that was really centered around a vintner culture of growing grapes might have lots of words for those grapes and how they are produced. And this word actually means that it's overripe. It's just to the point where it's like starting to spoil on the vine. And so there's this urgency then that is presented. We need to harvest now, no more delay. Now, I need to remind you, because we encounter it regularly in our own lives, we expect God to show up early, but he seldom does. But even though he doesn't show up early, he is never late. And that's exactly what we see in this moment. He's waiting, he's giving people opportunity to repent, to come to him until the absolute last possible moment. And so as a result, things are overripe. Now is the time, and the harvest needs to happen. There's urgency. And so he who sat on the cloud, it says in verse 16, swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. And you think, wait, that's it? That's all there is? That's the process? He just swings? Why didn't he just do that a long time ago? I mean, if it's that easy, and it really is, by the way, it's just like that. It happens. And the Son of Man's reaping is finished. That's it. Now, obviously, that's not it. We've just gotten a 30,000-foot view of the end with that statement. He swung his sickle and he reaped. Right? This is not supposed to be a descriptive statement of all of the things that happen at the end of all things. There is ultimately a more descriptive statement that is made, and we'll get there when we get to chapter 16, which is happening today. So we get this recapitulation then of that statement, and we sort of start to see that John is going to move from this 30,000-foot view, and he's going to start funneling down, and he's start looking closer and closer and closer in detail as we move into then verse 17 through verse 20. The sickle becomes this metaphor then of all of these other angels and what they do. Verse 17, then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Now I need to stop there, because often I've watched people encounter some confusion here because they look at the first description in verse 16 and they see this sickle being swung, and then they see verse 17 and they think two sickles, sickle in verse 16, verse 14, verse 16, and verse 17, and they say they must be the same sickle. Not so. One is swung by the Son of Man. This one is swung by an angel. So not even the same person that's involved here. This is an angel. So, and also in this, as we move through this, we stopped early, but as we move through this, you'll see we aren't dealing with grain harvest anymore. Now we're talking about grapes. So the picture has changed, the imagery has changed, and we're getting a different aspect of this harvest that is ultimately begun in verse 16 by the Son of Man. Verse 18, and another angel came out from the altar, the angel who has authority over the fire. And he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe. So this angel comes out from the altar. We were just talking about those martyrs who come before God and they're begging him, when is your justice going to be meted out on the earth, right? And they were all in chapter 6 collected around the altar crying out, how long before you avenge our blood? It's the same altar, there's only one, right? And then you may remember when we looked at chapter 8, we saw that there was this angel that had a censer and he went to the altar, right? And he took fire from the altar and then he flung it down on the earth. And what we said back then in chapter 8 was that that represented the prayers of all of these saints that God is now using as the reason for his judgment upon the earth. It becomes this symbolic picture of the judgment of the earth. And I think it may be the same angel. It says right there in verse 18, he's another angel who has authority over the fire. So maybe it's the same angel. I don't know. But it seems to make sense. It seems to all fit together. And so I think this same angel is coming out from the altar, and he's hearing all of these cries still of the saints, because they aren't satisfied. They were given white robes. That wouldn't satisfy me if I was asking for justice. And so he comes out from the altar, and he says to this angel with the sickle, do it. Gather the harvest. Verse 19, so the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia. See, everything is thrown into this winepress, if you notice, right? There's no more separation of wheat and weeds, this analogy, this imagery that we got from Matthew chapter 13. All that's left here is crushing. That's all that's going to happen. And I think that means there is no good fruit here in this harvest. You see, if you ask any vintner, they'll tell you good grapes are needed in order to produce good wine. But look at what comes out of these grapes. It's not even grape juice. It's blood, not wine. These are not good grapes. Now, why is it blood that comes out? Because what was sown was injustice. What was sown was murder. What was sown was lies and all of the rest. And if you go back to Solomon in Proverbs 22, he says, whoever sows injustice will reap calamity. And so throughout Revelation, we've seen the beast crushing the followers of God with his symbol, the economics crushing the followers of God. The two witnesses are killed and celebrated as they lie in the streets dead, celebrated globally. The dragon has tried to devour the people who proclaim the Lamb since he was cast out of heaven. Over and over, injustice is sown in blood. And so what we're seeing here is God has finally had enough. The harvest is overripe. I've let this go on enough. Now, what about that whole imagery of it flowing as high as a horse's bridle and 1,600 stadia? I mean, we don't deal in stadia. We don't even know what that means. Let me translate that for you. That's 180 miles. It's about the length of Israel from north to south. Not modern day Israel with the Sinai Peninsula, but I mean ancient Israel. At about the time that John thought of Israel. It's about 180 miles from north to south. And blood will cover it all. Now, I don't believe that it's actually as deep as a horse's bridle. It'd be like 4.5 feet deep for 180 miles. I don't think there's enough blood in the world to actually do that. I think it's a word picture for us to see that Israel, and that's why I think it's the stadia, the 1,600 stadia is important in this imagery. I think it's an image saying all of Israel is going to be covered in blood. That's what's in view here. There's nothing that's going to miss in this. Like Israel is going to go through this. And so I think this description is showing that God's trampling is going to be so violent, his wrath is going to be so severe and ferocious that it will cover everything. Now, I'm not married to that statement. If it's actually 4.5 feet deep, I'm going to say, you with the rest of you. but I think it's an image for us. See, here's a perspective that we need to have, because we love to go around, and everybody around us in our culture loves to say, oh, God is love. God is love. We just need to get along. God is love. He's a lovely dovey God, and he just wants to hug you. And you know, a ballad of Ricky Bobby. I just love itty bitty baby Jesus at Christmas time. I love that. I love that version of God. And that's the one I want to celebrate, and that's the one I want to pray to. But we have here an image that is completely different. This is a perspective that we need to have. This is a ferocious God. God's holiness is such that it will handle the vengeance that is needed on the earth. 180 miles of blood. That's the degree to which God will handle it.